In the history of Imperial China, there are figures whose names do not gleam with the gold of virtue, but with the crimson glow of all-consuming greed. One such figure was Heshen, a Manchu official whose career embodied an unprecedented ascent, absolute power, and a resounding downfall. He began as a humble guard, one of thousands of bodyguards to the aging Emperor Qianlong, when he first caught the Son of Heaven's attention. No noble name or vast inheritance stood behind him, only a sharp mind, extraordinary charisma, and, as some sources claim, a remarkable ability to please. Soon, Heshen achieved what seemed impossible for a man of his standing. He became indispensable to the emperor. In just 20 years, from 1775 to 1795, he transformed from a common courtier into the most powerful man in the Celestial Empire. He became the de facto ruler, concentrating dozens of key posts in his hands: Minister of Finance, Minister of Personnel, Commander-in-Chief of the Army, Head of the Imperial Household. These were just a few of his titles. His personal fortune, accumulated over these years, was estimated by some to exceed the empire's annual budget several times over, reaching astronomical sums equivalent to possibly billions of modern dollars. And it was precisely this fortune, this boundless, unrestrained greed, that afflicted the empire. Heshen built a colossal, all-encompassing system of corruption that permeated every level of the state apparatus. He sold offices, evaded taxes, embezzled military funds, created monopolies, and extorted bribes, paralyzing government operations and condemning millions to poverty. His rule was not merely a period of isolated abuses, but a time of systemic destruction that undermined the foundations of the Qing dynasty and foreshadowed its rapid decline. Heshen is often portrayed as a chief embezzler, a symbol of corruption in its primitive, straightforward sense. But this is a misconception. He was not merely a thief. He was a brilliant architect of decay, a master of political intrigue who used the emperor's blind affection as leverage to create his own empire within the state. His story is not just a tale of greed. It is a chilling precedent of how a ruler's personal attachment can be ruthlessly exploited to undermine an entire civilization. But behind the facade of this unprecedented destruction lies not just a villain, but a man whose fate was forged in the crucible of early losses and unrestrained ambition. To truly understand the origins of this boundless avarice, one must delve into the very beginnings of his life, into those formative years when the character of the future all-powerful favorite was shaped. Unlike many courtiers, Heshen was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His family, though part of the Manchu nobility, possessed neither wealth nor high standing. And, even more importantly, his childhood was marred by tragedy. His mother died when he was just 3 years old. 6 years later, at the age of 9, he lost his father as well. Suddenly orphaned, Heshen found himself under the care of his elder brother and a few relatives who, by all accounts, barely made ends meet themselves. This was not a life of destitution, but it was a life devoid of customary support and security. For a boy growing up in the imperial capital, such a blow could have been either a death sentence or a powerful stimulus. For Heshen, it seems to have been the latter. He received an education at a state school for Manchu noble children, which already spoke to his abilities and a certain level of support, but he knew that his future depended solely on himself. He could not rely on inheritance or connections. He had to make his own way solely through his intellect and tenacity. It was this experience of early loss and the struggle for survival that likely laid the foundation for his insatiable hunger for power and wealth. For him, every step up was not just career advancement, but a way to secure himself against a repeat of childhood vulnerability. He learned to be observant, calculating, to anticipate others' desires and use them to his advantage. And when, as a humble guard, he first met the aging Emperor Qianlong, he saw not just a monarch, but the key to absolute power. There is a legend that Heshen captivated the emperor with his striking resemblance to one of his long-deceased beloved concubines. Other sources point to his sharp mind and instantaneous reaction to an unexpected question from the monarch. Whatever the true reason, this first meeting became a point of no return for Heshen. He understood that in this world, personal favor and the ability to manipulate it were worth far more than any merit or principles. It was then likely that the program was launched, transforming a talented but traumatized youth into a ruthless architect of systemic decay. He realized that the path to security and greatness lay through absolute control over the emperor's attention, not through honest service. The era into which Heshen stepped was, at first glance, the zenith of the Qing dynasty's power. Emperor Qianlong, who had reigned for nearly 60 years, had led the empire to unprecedented prosperity at the beginning of his rule. The population had reached colossal sizes, the economy flourished, and the borders were expanded. But beneath this glossy facade, deep-seated problems were already brewing, creating ideal ground for the flourishing of Heshen's predatory nature. By the last quarter of the 18th century, when Heshen began his meteoric rise, the Qing Empire resembled a colossal ship drifting on inertia. Qianlong himself, once an energetic and perceptive ruler, had become noticeably weary and increasingly detached from routine governance by his 80s. His advanced age and prolonged reign led to an inevitable erosion of administrative discipline. Power was essentially concentrated in his hands, but his attention was diffused, leaving vast gaps that were eagerly filled by those willing to do anything for personal gain. The bureaucratic apparatus, once the pride of imperial administration, had turned into a hotbed of nepotism and bribery. Offices were bought and sold, and efficiency and honesty had long ceased to be criteria for promotion. The financial system, despite apparent wealth, was under colossal strain. Exorbitant military expenditures on distant and often meaningless campaigns, such as suppressing rebellions in Zungaria or Nepal, depleted the treasury. At the same time, the empire's population grew explosively, exceeding 300 million people, which placed unimaginable pressure on agricultural lands and food resources. Famine and poverty became increasingly common in the provinces, fueling social discontent. At the same time, the ideological foundations of Confucianism, which had served as a moral compass for officials for centuries, were gradually eroding. Pragmatism and outright cynicism came to the fore. The examination system, designed to select the best and most capable, was increasingly bypassed or completely ignored in favor of personal connections and offerings. All of this created an atmosphere of permissiveness and impunity, where personal loyalty to the emperor, or rather the ability to feign it, was valued above public service. It was in such a dysfunctional, yet outwardly prosperous environment, where old checks and balances ceased to work, and new ones had not yet emerged, that Heshen found his ideal niche. He did not create this system. He merely perfected it, becoming its quintessence and its most striking yet most destructive manifestation. It was precisely when the Qing Empire desperately needed every jin, unit of weight, of silver to maintain its vast borders, that Heshen turned his attention to military budgets. Wars scattered across the immense territory, from the mountain passes of Nepal to the rebellious provinces of Sichuan and Taiwan, demanded colossal resources. Heshen, as one of the key leaders of military campaigns and later commander-in-chief, quickly realized that the battlefield was not only a place of glory, but also a gold mine. He masterfully manipulated expenditure reports, inflating the cost of uniforms, provisions, and armaments by tens or even hundreds of times. On paper, thousands of soldiers received generous salaries, while in reality, a portion of these funds ended up in the pockets of Heshen and his accomplices. Phantom regiments, non-existent supplies, and vastly inflated bills for transport and logistics became the norm. Soldiers on the front suffered from a lack of supplies, received substandard equipment, and their families lived in poverty, while corrupt generals, appointed by Heshen, turned a blind eye to these embezzlements, receiving their share. The empire's losses from the Taiwan campaign alone, by some estimates, reached tens of millions of liang of silver, most of which vanished without a trace, dissolving into the favorite's bottomless pockets. This led to prolonged conflicts, weakened army morale, and consequently, even greater expenses, creating a vicious cycle from which the Qing Empire could no longer escape. But military embezzlement was only one stream feeding his bottomless fortune. The true masterpiece of his corrupt genius was the systematic sale of government offices. Heshen, holding the post of Minister of Personnel, Li Bu Shangshu, transformed the centuries-old, well-established system for selecting officials into an auction. Every position, from county magistrate to provincial governor, had its price, which varied depending on its prestige and potential profitability. Lists with price rates openly circulated among those willing to pay. From then on, it was not merit, education, or loyalty to Confucian principles, but solely the thickness of one's purse that determined career advancement. By paying Heshen, one could not only obtain the desired post, but also count on his patronage should problems arise. This created an entire army of incompetent but loyal officials, who in turn were forced to recoup their investments by extorting bribes and robbing the populace. The lack of oversight from the aging Emperor Qianlong and complete impunity turned the entire power vertical into an elaborate network of extortion. Those who tried to resist or report the truth to the emperor quickly disappeared from the political scene. Their careers were ruined, and sometimes their lives were cut short by fabricated charges orchestrated by Heshen. In addition to direct extortion, Heshen actively created monopolies and manipulated the tax system. He controlled the trade in salt and tea, as well as the mining industry, appointing his cronies to key positions in these lucrative sectors. Anyone who wanted to conduct business first had to pay Heshen. He levied unofficial duties, granted exclusive rights to his associates, and blocked competitors, ruining honest merchants and artisans. This led to artificial shortages of goods, rising prices, and the impoverishment of the population. The state treasury lost enormous sums that ended up in his private coffers, while the provinces suffocated under the tax burden, and the people grew increasingly resentful. Heshen didn't just steal. He restructured the empire's economy to suit himself, turning it into a giant cash cow whose profits went exclusively into his pocket. His financial manipulations were so comprehensive that there was no sphere left untouched by his hand, transforming a prosperous empire into the personal domain of one man. Having turned the empire into his personal domain, Heshen didn't merely exploit existing flaws. He masterfully played on the basest human instincts, transforming them into instruments of his own elevation. His personal arsenal was far more sophisticated than simple extortion. At its core lay a phenomenal ability to read people. He didn't just guess desires, he saw fears, hidden ambitions, a thirst for recognition, and of course, insatiable avarice. And for each, he found a unique approach. For some, he was a generous patron, opening doors to unseen riches. For others, a strict but fair mentor, promising career advancement. For still others, a formidable adversary whose wrath was to be feared more than the emperor's. His charisma, previously noted only in the context of the emperor, was multifaceted. He could be simultaneously courteous and authoritative, persuasive and fear-inducing. He didn't just promise positions. He sold the dream of a comfortable old age, of power, of the chance to finally escape poverty. He created an aura of omnipotence around himself, convincing potential clients that only through him lay the path to success. This artificially created atmosphere of exclusivity and indispensability caused officials and merchants to literally line up to buy their share in his corrupt empire. He masterfully spread rumors of his invincibility, that he was in with the emperor, and that his word was law. This was a kind of psychological marketing, where the fear of missing out and the fear of being outside the system were powerful. Motivators. The selection of experts for his vast network was a distinct art. Heshen did not seek the most competent or honest individuals. He needed those whose loyalty was absolute and whose moral principles were sufficiently flexible. He chose people who already had a propensity for bribery or were deeply indebted, making them utterly dependent on his patronage. He created a system of mutual complicity, where each new corrupt official became not just an accomplice, but a hostage of the system Heshen had built. These experts did not merely execute his orders. They were his eyes and ears in every province, in every department, promptly informing him of any discontent or attempt at resistance. It was thanks to this network that Heshen demonstrated astonishing adaptability. When problems arose, be it an audit, discontent among provincial officials, or even murmurs within the army, he reacted instantaneously. He could redirect funds, bribe key witnesses, fabricate charges against undesirables, or even stage show purges to deflect suspicion from himself. His system was so flexible and extensive that it could absorb blows and recover, quickly adapting to new conditions. He was not a dogmatist. If one method stopped working, he immediately invented 10 new ones. This capacity for improvisation, for instant tactical readjustment when everything seemed to be going against him, was one of the main reasons for his incredible longevity at the pinnacle of power. He was not merely a thief, but an outstanding strategist, whose battlefield stretched from the imperial palace to the most distant provinces, and where human weaknesses served as his weapons. The human weaknesses, skillfully exploited by Heshen, formed the foundation for an entire army of accomplices whose fates were inextricably linked to his own rise. He didn't just sell offices. He created a clan, a network that stretched from the heart of the Forbidden City to the farthest reaches of the empire. His relatives, especially his younger brother Helen, who became governor of Sichuan province and commander-in-chief, held key posts, forming an unshakable support. These individuals did not merely blindly follow his instructions. They were active participants, receiving the lion's share of the plunder, providing him with information, and eliminating obstacles. Their personal wealth grew in sync with his, creating a powerful incentive to maintain Heshen's system. This all-encompassing network, reinforced by fear and greed, acted as a single organism, effectively suppressing any dissent. Honest officials who dared to report corruption or attempt to resist faced a ruthless machine. They were accused of fabricated crimes, stripped of their positions, exiled, and sometimes even executed. Dozens, if not hundreds of such cases served as a grim warning to anyone who contemplated opposing the all-powerful favorite. No merits to the empire, no loyalty to Confucian ideals could protect against his vengeance. Heshen's system was airtight, and his expert informants, positioned throughout the country, ensured that no whisper of discontent went unnoticed. But even under such total power, there were always those who saw the true state of affairs and, albeit silently, suffered from it. Foremost among them was the heir apparent, the future emperor, Jiaqing. Unlike his aging father, Qianlong, who was blinded by affection and perhaps by weariness, Jiaqing harbored no illusions. He saw how the empire he was to inherit was bleeding, how its foundations were being corroded by metastasizing corruption. Heshen, understanding the threat posed by the perceptive heir, constantly tried to isolate Jiaqing from his father, discredit him, and strip him of influence. He surrounded him with his spies, intercepted messages, and distorted information reaching the emperor. This was not merely political rivalry. It was a hidden but ruthless struggle for the dynasty's future. Jiaqing, realizing that an open confrontation with Heshen during Qianlong's lifetime would be suicidal, was forced to patiently bide his time. He observed, memorizing every abuse, every act of tyranny, accumulating a dossier that would one day become a death sentence. This waiting, this forced passivity in the face of impending catastrophe, only intensified his resolve. For Jiaqing, Heshen was not just a corrupt official, but the living embodiment of everything that was destroying the empire, and his removal would be the first and most crucial step towards revival. This hidden, deeply personal confrontation between the all-powerful favorite and the patient heir became the axis around which the fate of the Qing dynasty revolved in the final years of Qianlong's reign. Finally, after nearly 60 years on the throne, the aging Emperor Qianlong passed away in 1799. His death was the signal Jiaqing had awaited for years, patiently planning his retribution. Less than 15 days after his father's demise, Jiaqing, wasting no time, ordered Heshen's arrest. It was a swift, meticulously planned strike, designed to leave the favorite no chance to resist or escape. On the night of the 18th day of the first month of the new year, imperial guards surrounded Heshen's opulent residence, catching the all-powerful temporary ruler by surprise. The charges brought against Heshen were devastating, numbering 20 counts, each of which could lead to the death penalty. Among them were treason, usurpation of power, forging imperial decrees, misappropriation of titles, embezzlement of state funds on astronomical scales, creation of secret armies, illegal land appropriation, and even attempts to assassinate the heir apparent. Jiaqing, who had methodically gathered incriminating evidence over many years, presented irrefutable proof that left Heshen no possibility of justification. This was not merely an accusation of corruption. It was a condemnation of the entire system Heshen had built and the entire clan he had created. When imperial investigators stormed Heshen's residences, his main estate and several dozen other properties in the capital and beyond, what they discovered shocked even seasoned officials. These were not just riches, but entire warehouses of treasures. In basements and secret rooms they found tons of gold and silver, with tens of thousands of ingots, hundreds of thousands of coins, thousands of gold and silver bars, piles of precious gems, rare pearls the size of a pigeon's egg, jade artifacts of unprecedented beauty, countless collections of antiques, rare paintings, and calligraphy. His wardrobes overflowed with silks and furs, and his storerooms with exquisite wines and delicacies. In addition to movable property, Heshen owned hundreds of thousands of acres of fertile land, thousands of houses, shops, pawnshops, and lending houses throughout the empire. He controlled vast tea and salt plantations, and owned mines and trade routes. The total value of the confiscated property, by the most conservative estimates, exceeded the state treasury's annual income by 15 times. This sum was so colossal that even today, accounting for inflation and conversion to modern currencies, it could amount to billions, if not tens of billions of dollars. He was not merely the richest man in China. He was one of the wealthiest individuals in human history, whose fortune was accumulated solely through the plunder of national resources and the impoverishment of his own people. News of Heshen's downfall spread like wildfire throughout the empire, sparking a wave of jubilation among common people and officials who had suffered under his tyranny. The masses, who had endured his oppression and extortion for years, saw this act as divine justice. Many officials, who had previously harbored resentment or feared opposing the favorite, now dared to submit reports confirming his crimes. Public opinion was unanimous. Heshen deserved the severest punishment. In the face of irrefutable evidence and under pressure from widespread public indignation, Heshen was sentenced to execution. However, considering his past services and perhaps out of lingering respect for Qianlong's memory, who had protected his favorite until the end of his life, Jiaqing granted him an honorable death, the right to commit suicide. The 9th day of the 2nd month of 1799 marked the last day of Heshen's life. He hanged himself in his prison cell, thereby ending an era of unprecedented corruption and personal arbitrary rule. Heshen's fall was not merely the removal of one man, it was an act of symbolic cleansing, an attempt by the new emperor to restore trust in the dynasty and show that even the most powerful temporary ruler could not be above the law. The immense wealth extracted from Heshen's hidden caches immediately flowed into the depleted imperial treasury. The confiscated tons of gold, silver, jewels, thousands of acres of land, and hundreds of businesses amounted to a sum equivalent to 15 years of the empire's annual income. These funds became a vital financial injection, allowing Jiaqing to pay off a portion of the accumulated state debts related to costly military campaigns and to provide urgent payments to troops and officials. Heshen's downfall also triggered a large-scale purge within the state apparatus. Dozens and hundreds of officials who owed their positions to him or participated in his corrupt schemes were arrested, stripped of their posts, and had their property confiscated. Many were sent into exile, and the most egregious were executed. Emperor Jiaqing appointed new, competent individuals to key positions, striving to restore the shattered power structure. The system of selling offices was officially abolished, and civil service examinations once again became a priority. Jiaqing attempted to reform the tax system and state monopolies that Heshen had exploited for personal gain. Tariffs were revised, tax collection oversight was strengthened, and some of the most egregious monopolies were dismantled. For the populace, this meant a temporary reduction in the tax burden and lower prices for goods. However, despite these decisive measures, the scale of corruption, deeply entrenched over decades, proved too profound. Many accomplices managed to hide part of their fortunes or had too strong connections to be completely eradicated, hindering a full restoration of governmental integrity. Thus, the confiscation of Heshen's wealth and the subsequent purges provided the Qing Empire with only a brief respite, allowing Jiaqing to consolidate his personal power and temporarily stabilize finances. However, despite the scale of the measures undertaken, Heshen's true legacy proved far more complex and sinister than merely the memory of the greatest embezzler. His downfall, so vivid and instructive, was merely a superficial cure for an empire suffering from far deeper ailments. In popular consciousness, he became enshrined as the epitome of an unprincipled temporary ruler, a symbol of absolute avarice, whose story serves as a universal warning. But this popular image, though true in its essence, overlooks a crucial, far more unsettling lesson. The paradox of Heshen lies not only in his ability to rise to unprecedented heights, but also in the fact that his elimination, seemingly a triumph of justice, could not halt the inexorable march of history. The people rejoiced. Emperor Jiaqing restored order, but the hidden cracks that Heshen had so masterfully widened were already too deep. He was not the root cause of the Qing dynasty's decline. Rather, he was a catalyst who exposed and accelerated the decay that had long been consuming the imperial body. His phenomenal success was only possible because the system itself was vulnerable, and its foundation, the autocratic rule of an aging monarch, gave him unlimited opportunities for maneuver. Heshen's story is not just a chronicle of theft, but a chilling examination of how a ruler's personal attachment and blindness can be used for systemic destruction. It is a story of how one person's greed, multiplied by the weakness of the state, metastasizes, affecting every cell of society. We tend to simplify him into the image of the chief villain, but he was more of a brilliant parasite who flourished in an environment favorable to him. His story teaches us that the fight against corruption is not just a battle against individuals, but against the conditions that allow these individuals to thrive. The universal lesson of his fate echoes through the centuries. Any power not constrained by effective mechanisms of control and accountability inevitably becomes a breeding ground for arbitrary rule. Even the most powerful empire, if its institutions weaken and its elite loses moral bearings, becomes vulnerable to internal enemies far more dangerous than external ones. Heshen, in the end, was merely a symptom, and while his fall brought temporary relief, it could not prevent the ultimate decline of the Qing dynasty, which occurred just a few decades later, confirming that systemic problems require systemic solutions, not just the removal of one, however grand, villain. His name remains not just a symbol of avarice, but a grim reminder of the fragility of even the most powerful empires when they are corroded from within.